Hello, and welcome to another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. Today, I'm joined by author Tom Meschery and his editor, Jennifer McCord. We're going to talk a little bit about Tom's new book, The Case of the '61 Chevy Impala. Before we begin, I do want to let those listening in know that the Poison Pen does have copies of Tom's new mystery on order, and we would be happy to hold one for you or put one in the mail. Just give us a call or go online to the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we can connect you with a truly intriguing book. And now I'd like to welcome Jennifer and Tom.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having us.
And thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for joining us today. My first question for Tom is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself before you became a writer? Because as I was reading about you, your own life is more fascinating than most novels.
Well, John, you caught me at a good time. Jennifer and I are just finishing up the editing on my memoir, The Mad Manchurian, and that's also a story in itself. How I got that nickname when I was a professional basketball player in the NBA. I was born in Harbin, Manchuria. My mother and father escaped the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 and settled in Harbin, northern China, and that's where I was born in 1938. I'm willing to admit my age, and we were interned in the Japanese concentration camp during the Second World War. So we didn't arrive in the United States until after the war, 1946. So I'm an immigrant kid, and had to learn, surprisingly, had to learn English as a second language. Winding up being an English teacher was really a shock to me.
Mhm.
And then, of course, when I got to the United States, I became deeply involved in sports because, John, that's the way you become an American.
Yeah.
Sports is one of the ways you become an American. And you learn that as a child. And I was picked on a great deal when I was a kid because I didn't speak English very well. And my mother sent me to school in short pants, if you can imagine. And so I picked up on the one thing that I knew I did well. I was very athletic and strong, and I picked up on sports and started to get involved in that. And that led me all the way through the various stages of athleticism. It took me to high school basketball, college basketball. I had a scholarship to St. Mary's College in California, and then to the NBA. I was drafted by the then Philadelphia Warriors, 1961 in the first round. And I went on to a 10-year career in the NBA before I retired. And that's when I sort of went into free fall. I had no idea what I was going to do after this long career in basketball, and settled on teaching, and I just adored it, and went on to a 25-year career as a English teacher in Reno High School in Reno. At that time, I was already married and had children, and we were living in Truckee, California, which is up near Lake Tahoe. And so I would drive down every morning, and for 25 years, I taught British literature and Beowulf and James Joyce, and loved it. But it was about that time, and if we're getting back to writing mysteries, is sort of when I got involved in mystery writing.
Now, you've written other things before The Case of the '61 Chevy Impala, poetry and some other types of works. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Well, I always gravitated to poetry. Even when I was a player, I think the first poems I ever published were in the Philadelphia Inquirer sports page. So a sports writer named Sandy Padway published the poems, and I remember my teammates looking at me askance as they read poetry on the sports page, wondering, "Oh my God, who is this guy who's our teammate, writes poetry? possibly be. But we're Russian. It's in our blood. That's the way Russians think. I think they think in terms of vodka and poetry. So it's so I always thought that that's what I would like to do, and I have. I actually didn't learn a lot about poetry until a little bit later. I was about to retire, and I took a class at the University of Washington. By then, I was playing for the Seattle Sonics of the NBA in Seattle, and a good citizen of Seattle. And I took a class at the University of Washington from Mark Strand, who was later a poet laureate of the United States, really a terrific guy. And he exposed me to modern poetry. I was at that point, doing, some real bad imitations of Carl Sandburg. And so so then when I went into coaching afterwards, after retiring from playing, and I was just a miserable coach. I was just terrible. I had no patience, and it was just not my bailiwick. And Mark, I talked to Mark on the phone. He said, "Why don't you apply to the University of Iowa's Writers Workshop, and I'll send him a letter." And he did, and I applied, and I was accepted, and I stayed there for 2 years, and I got my Master's of Fine Arts degree in poetry. And ever then, from that point on, I wrote poems. I've written poems every day of my life, and I've published 4 collections. And then, of course, here come the mysteries, and I just love writing them, and I'll do that until the universe calls me.
Jennifer, what about the case of the 61 Chevy Impala when it landed on your desk said to you, I must publish this, I must edit this?
Well, John, that's such a good question. We get a lot of submissions, and I remember I got this and I looked at it and I recognized the voice as being a former Supersonic NBA basketball player. And I thought, I wonder what's up with this. And his bio, he's being a teacher and he has MFA. And I skipped over the part that he was related to Tolstoy. Until my husband said, do you realize that Tom's related to Tolstoy? And I went, what? And so, but all that was after I first started the first couple of chapters. And today is the birthday of my twin sisters, identical twin sisters.
Yeah.
And my mother was a twin, and I have twin nephews. And so we've been studied as a family about twins. How do they communicate? How do they relate? How do they do this? And when I opened it up, and we have twin brothers, identical twin brothers, who run a used car business in Oakland. And I immediately felt he had nailed what it's like to be a twin. How do they relate to each other? How do they argue with each other? How do they have each other's back? How do they go through life? And these two are in business together, and they're carrying on the family business from their father. And it had all the elements of a good mystery. Starts off with a murder. It starts off with who's going to solve this. It's an amateur detective. And it's all set during the late 60s, which is an interesting time period. And the other thing I thought was so well done is he has such a strong voice as a writer, but he also built this community in his book of the characters. We have the J Ness, we have the place where they go to eat. We have all these places, and you see that in the second book too. And so you have all these elements that make it a really interesting mystery to read. So that's what started me right away to get involved with it. And then to say to Tom, because we take the first 50 pages, Tom, send me the full manuscript. So Tom sent me the full manuscript. And then it was, I'm calling him to offer him a contract.
Wow. What can you tell readers about the book, Tom, without spoiling too much about it?
Well, it's set in probably one of the most turbulent months of the 1960s, 1968, and March, April, and May. And So I think anybody who knows that historical period or is interested in that historic period would find that sort of fascinating. I I learned when I first started to read mysteries. I was laid up with recovering from a surgery, and my neighbor turned me on to the Tony Hillerman books,
Wow.
and I was I wasn't sure if I was going to read them, but I had my leg up on a pillow and I started reading the Hillerman books, and I just love those Lee Chi books. They're just fascinating, and I just love the culture. And one of the things I learned from that is that well, I just was amazed at what they could get, what Hillerman got into those books. He got in culture, he got in philosophy, he got in history, he got in humanity. I just was hooked at that point. I love the Sherlock Holmes mystery. I loved reading adventures when I was a kid, but when I read Hillerman, I just thought, oh my, this guy has really got it. And I vowed later, this is much later when I started writing mysteries, I vowed that I would do what Hillerman did. I would get history. History would always be a part of my book, and I would want to have culture be part of my novel, and ideas and humanity, and I would weave that with the murder mystery, the solution, and all of those wonderful Agatha Christie ideas that you as a private sleuth you have to go through to find out who done it. So that begins it, and then the Brevelli brothers, or the Brevelli boys, who have taken over from their father's used car business on East 14th Street in Oakland, California, are based loosely on a couple of guys I knew in college, two twins, and they started me thinking about them, and I started thinking about twins, and I thought that they were very interesting characters to try and develop the twinness, the whole idea of twinness. My ex-wife is a twin, so I know a little bit about twins. And then the setting itself, they immediately find a dead body right away in the novel. They repoed a car that they sort of semi-lease or sell to this disreputable character called Sweets, who is he's a sort of a semi-burglar who steals from the rich and gives to good-looking single wives who then appreciate him. And so these guys find this dead body in the back, in the trunk of his car, and they recognize it as Sweet's girlfriend. So they are off. At first, they don't want to have anything to do with it, but Sweets and the past has saved their father's business from a gang, a very evil gang in Oakland. And the father is, as an immigrant, he came to the United States, and I like putting in the immigration part of the story because that has a little bit of connection to me, so I know a little bit about immigrants. And the father believes in onore, which is honor, and he feels that the boys, to save the family honor, should go out and try and prove that Sweets is not killer, because Sweets is the suspect of the police department. And so that's sort of how it starts, John. They get on they become private sleuths. Victor, the principal character, the principal twin, becomes the sleuth. Vincent is married already and has a child on the way, and so Victor cuts him a little slack. Now, in the second book, it's pretty much the same way, but I've started the third already. The case of the Volkswagen custom van, and in that book, Vincent has a greater role as a sleuth. the two boys go on this. I mean, Victor goes on. He actually has to go out and buy a book on being a private detective in order to find out what it's like and what he has to go through to find out who the murderer is. And that's sort of the beginning of it. And then hopefully the reader's hooked by then.
Because it's set in the 1960s, I'm guessing that a lot of the information are things that you put in the book, things that you've experienced, but you also had to do some research too, to get facts and things correct. Can you talk a little bit about writing a different historical period, what that involves?
Yeah, I did have to do some research. A lot of my research had to do with getting a hold of old friends who were part of the scene back then. In San Francisco was one of the hotbeds of anti-war, anti-Vietnam War protests. And so a number of my friends were involved in that. So I got a hold of a lot of them, got a lot of background on their experiences. I also got a hold of a lot of African American friends I had who were had a little bit better knowledge of the Black Panthers and what they went through. So I was, rather than being on the computer, I was researching other friends and acquaintances I had from that period back then. Added to that, of course, was my own experience. And I was pretty much involved in playing sports at that time, but I was part of a group of athletes who were sort of anti-war, and so I knew a lot of the guys, and the Jack Scotts and so on, and so I got a hold of them. But then, of course, I did get online. Online is wonderful. There's so much information out there, and I wanted to make sure that a lot of the research I had to do was go online was about music and the culture that I had forgotten. Like, what are the great songs that were going on? Because Victor's driving in his car and he turns on the radio. It'd be foolish to be doing something with some song by Lady Gaga while he's driving. So he definitely had to get some research in that way. So I had to do quite a bit of research and all.
It's a fascinating picture of the times that you really put into the books. It's very vivid, very evocative, and you have those wonderful little details that I, as a reader, love discovering, because you'll learn things like, I think somewhere in the book you mentioned $500 bills and how they were going to go out of circulation. And I never really thought about that. I thought, wow, that's something that happened then.
Well, John, that I did find that online. I did go back and look at culture and see what was going on at that time. I'm with you. I don't remember that at all. But so when I was looking at it on screen, I thought, oh, this is terrific. And I think if you're a mystery writer, if you're a writer in general, if you're a novelist, one of the things you have to have is curiosity. I mean, if you're not curious about things, you're probably not going to be a writer. And so every time I got online, it was called research rapture. Somebody told me, you get online and you start doing research. Next thing you know, it's lunchtime.
When you were working with Tom, Jennifer, did you know from the first that this needed to be a series? Did you think this has to continue?
I think he wrote us that it was a series.
Okay.
So I had a feeling it would be a series. And it's the first I've heard about book 3, Tom, because I've read book 2. We're working on book 2. I think that was important that it be a series in terms of just the kind of characters that he's developing, and the fact that Victor is going to be start off as a private detective or amateur sleuth. You want to see him develop. Is he going to figure that out? Is he going to have to just make a decision to become an amateur private detective? Can he still be in the used car business? How's that going to work with his brother? Vic also finds the love of his life in this series. And so how is that going to work for him? So there's lots of potential for character development for both brothers, plus the family, the Italian family, because there's other siblings. And in book 2, we have the older brother is part of the story. So it's an interesting storyline. There's lots of potential for it. And I like that. And I also like the used car business. I was looking, you're reading for settings that are different, that are interesting. I'm not a particularly car person, but I think I learned a lot about cars from reading this, and just in general, and the used car business and what they have to do. And that was important. And I think Tom captured the times really well. He created that world really well, of Oakland in the late 60s. And it's interesting, I have family who are living in California at that time, and I talked to them about that too, and what they remember about the late 60s in Oakland and that area. And Tom, you really caught that area of what was going on with the Black Panthers and everything else, and just the anti-war and what was happening. So that was really interesting. And we had discussions about that, didn't we, Tom?
We sure do.
Yeah, we had discussions about how that worked, and did it work for everybody, all of us who were reading it. So I thought that worked. So it did create a setting.
And Jennifer has provided me with so many great suggestions. She's a real pro. And I'm just, I'm a total amateur as far as mystery writing is concerned. I think I know a lot more about it now than I've finished two novels. But I couldn't have found a better editor ever than Jennifer. She just managed to nail a lot of the things that I needed to really consider and reconsider when I was writing, and so it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, the other thing, Tom, that was for Tom and John was interesting is we have Winona, the victim, and how the victim is worked with in this book is also interesting. Tom understood that not only do you build the live characters, but you also think about what happened to the person who was murdered. And so we have the ghost of Winona showing up a little bit. And I thought that was interesting with the Italian story of that, of his great aunt, right, Tom?
Yes, it's very much an Italian way of looking at death.
Right, which was also really interesting in terms of weaving that into the story. I thought that was a really particularly creative way of looking at death and what was going on with Winona.
It sounds like the series is going to be built around, for lack of a better term, the hook of cars, because you use that in the titles. Did your series character develop his love of cars from you, Tom?
Well, yes and no. I think my original buddies from college were such great, knowledgeable car guys that when I was going to college, that was their main topic of conversation. And so I learned an awful lot about cars from them. I'm not like Jennifer, I'm not a car guy, but I became sort of a car guy just in the process of writing about cars. And I needed a jumping off point. I knew they had to be in the used car business. So I knew that I needed to have something in the title that would bring the reader to the book, to pick the book up off the shelf, and I thought that would be the way to do it. So it's my intention in the series that every future novel will begin with an automobile. It could be, the next one is going to be a 1966 Ford Mustang. But there's always going to be, the murder is going to be built around, tangentially around the automobile. And the next one is the Studebaker, the Volkswagen. And I don't mean to surprise you, Jennifer, but there's also going to be a Studebaker involved there at some point down the line. I have some idea that maybe I might be able to get halfway through what Hillerman did. I think he got 19 Jochi mysteries, but I wanted to build around something that's really constant. And it seemed to me like that was just a natural. They're in the used car business, and let's see what, people love cars. It's a part of the American culture is automobiles. And I actually love exterior cars. I'm not so much of a motor person, but I do love, upholstery, and I love the color schemes and the stuff that's more artistic, I think.
My next question, I guess, is both for you, Tom, and for Jennifer, because you see it from different perspectives, the writer and the editor. How, when you're writing a book set in a time period as tumultuous as the 1960s, do you capture that realistically, but also so that the modern reader understands things have changed? I mean, things happened in the 1960s that we would not necessarily be comfortable with today, but it's real to that time period. So how do you balance those two things?
Well, I'll let Jennifer start with that, because I was, she really had to give me some really suggestions about that, because I sort of spoke in the language of the 60s, and that's just got to be very careful these days, apparently, of what Jennifer told me. And so I'll let her
Okay.
finish that.
I think part of it is the characters. It's how Tom built the characters that helped us see the 60s through their lens. It was the lens of the characters that are in the book. So by virtue of that helped contain what was going on in those tumultuous times. I think because each character, we have the Black Panthers, we have the bicycle. I mean, we have other characters, the gangs. We have the gang, the motorcycle gang. We have various characters that come in, the police, and each of them have a point of view that Tom has with the characters. So that helps. Again, the setting of the used car business. I love the fact that on Saturdays they have the barbecue for the community. So we have a ability to have characters come in and out, so we see what's going on in the times. And it was woven really good, which is the skill of Tom, the writer. His prose that he brought to this helped create that. And you didn't overwhelm the reader with that information, but also because the goal is a murder mystery, to solve the murder, that also kept the focus moving forward. So we weren't involved so much in the political statements of the time, meaning that we had them in there, but they weren't the focus of the story per se. We're still trying to figure out who murdered who, because there's a second murder that takes place. So what's going on here? That's how I saw it, is the ability to keep the focus going.
I didn't want the book to be didactic. I didn't want to, I wasn't planning to be a historian. Jennifer's right. I wanted the characters to take the story where they were going, and so a lot of the book, there's a great deal of emphasis on dialogue, and I think it's how the guys talk to each other, and how they talk to their friends, and how they talk to the suspects and so on, is it moves the novel through the historical period of time. So it's almost like the historical period of time is just its background, rather than it is an actual lesson in history. And as it turns out, I think it is a little bit of a lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the action and reaction of the characters too, Tom. As Vic is going to meet with the Black Panthers, the reaction of everything that goes on and how people talk to one another, it was also through the character's point of view. So we all got what was going on through the various characters that you brought into the story, which would, to me, felt authentic to the times. And we did talk about some times where I thought some of the language would be problematic of how do you talk to people. So we did look at that and did discuss that at some length.
Because you've written other kinds of things like poetry, Tom, did you have to adjust the way you wrote when you came to writing a mystery? Was there kind of some shift that you had to do? Because I'm guessing, and this is a guess, poetry is a much different kind of literary beast than mysteries.
Yeah, it is. It certainly is. It's, I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to write. I have to confess that I wrote a mystery, an entire manuscript, which was a mystery set in the '70s, in the early '70s, based on sort of the radical sports guys that I knew. Jack Scott, actually, and guys like that. And I sent the manuscript to a friend of mine, John Jackson, who writes hard-boiled mysteries. He lives up in Montana. And he sent the manuscript back with at the top of the manuscript in red ink. He said, "Meschery, I thought you could write better than this." So at that point, I took that manuscript, I put it in the bottom of the lower bottom of the locker of a file cabinet I had, and I went back to poetry. But then John, I realized when I finally wanted to get back to the mysteries, because I'm a pretty stubborn guy, I just decided, no, I was able to write better than this. So I got started on the mysteries again. And I went to John because I really admire his writing. And I know that he's very smart. And he gave me a lot of hints about writing. And one of the things he told me, and when I first sent him a few chapters of 61 Chevy Impala, he says, no, don't, you can't do this in first person present tense. Because that's the way I started, in first person present tense. He says, it's just going to be too close. You're going to be too close to the character. You need to distance yourself a little bit. It's okay, to write present tense, but don't get in that whole first person kind of thing. You're going to get in some problems with that. So I did change the point of view a little bit, and it turned out much better. So that was one of the things that helped me along the way. And also, I being in Iowa, I was exposed to an awful lot of modern fiction writers. And back in 70, I guess it was 73, 74, when I was in Iowa. So I listened to conversations. The fiction writers and the poets would get together at the parties, and I would listen to their conversations. So I had a lot of things in my mind while writing fiction. One of the things I always liked was the idea of, you just have to let the story reveal itself as you go along. You're not going to know the ending until you turn the last curve of the road. You start out with, as if you're driving in a car at night. And I can't remember which author said that. It's like, writing fiction is like driving the car at night with your headlights on, but you don't know where you're going to be until you make that next turn.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of went along with that idea, that I let the story direct me in the way it was going to go. And I found out that the boys, actually Victor, and helped me. The character in the story helped me develop the story, because I sort of got into his head so much that he was like my co-pilot, and he informed me about where I should go. And I mean, that sounds so ethereal. I think. I hope I'm not being too vague, but I actually believe that the characters in the story drive you through the story to its ending.
I have to ask, there's a lot of references to authors and books in your first mystery. Are those favorite authors of yours? Like, I think Ross MacDonald was one of them mentioned.
Oh yeah. Well, I really am a crazy mystery reader. Ian Rankin is one of my favorites, and I love Anna Leon, and I mean I'll read them. Yes, they are a lot of my favorites. I like Ross MacDonald a lot. John MacDonald too is pretty damn good. Travis McGee's a pretty good character. So I love reading mysteries, and I taught so many classics too. So it's kind of the mystery genre got me. Was a little bit more relaxed. I could kind of kick back a little bit with it and still get all of the wonderful things that come into some of the classics. I see Ian Rankin as I find him as fascinating as any philosopher. That poor Rebus guy is so, in his drunken stupor sometimes, comes up with some wonderful ideas. So yeah, they are. The answer to your question is yeah. I'm a big mystery fan.
And was the references to War and Peace a nod to your own literary ancestry?
Well, I think that's my ego talking. He's not an uncle or anything like that, but he is a distant cousin.
Before we run out of time, and I can't believe how quickly it's gone by, you've mentioned there's going to be more books in the series. Do we want to say anything about those, either Tom or Jennifer?
Well, I just want to say we're going to bring out, Epicenter Press is going to be bringing out his memoir. And I'm working with Tom to get that finished and to have the photos sent to us. And then you have a couple more mysteries, but we also bought your story about the young boy who has hops, right?
The kid has hops. Yeah, that's a standalone.
We have a fiction standalone book too.
Yeah.
And I enjoy reading Tom's writing so much that when Tom tells me you have another book in the drawer, I'm like, Tom, maybe we should see that. Because John, you're right. He has such a strong voice as an author that it really is. When I get Tom sends me his manuscripts, it's like, okay, what can I get done quickly so I can start to read Tom's new manuscript and see what he's up to as a writer. And one other thing is popular fiction often has little kernels of truth, I always think of, that they sort of slip in, where characters say something that's really the truth about your life or some part of your life. And Tom, there is a lot of that about going on in your mysteries. You have little kernels of truth of people living and relationships and what works or what doesn't. And the whole thing of honor in this book. What does honor mean? It isn't just solving the murder mystery, it's what is honor for Vic and Vincent and the family. And that's also in book 2, and I'm sure it's in the rest of the books, what is honor? And I think that's also something that's in your memoir, what is honor? So that's an important value.
It does come through in the books.
Yeah.
Well, do you have anything else you'd like to add before we have to sign off?
Tom, do you have something?
Well, I just didn't mean to surprise you, Jennifer, but I've got outlines for at least 3 or 4 more Big Brothers mysteries, if you're willing to look at them. So.
Oh, yeah. So, John, you heard it here.
Yes, readers that love this first book will be glad to know there's more in the works for that.
One other thing is why I was in a book selling business years ago in my life. And one of the things I always wanted to make sure is I had new books, new authors that I would find, and books when I went and pack them. It was like Christmas for me. It was like, I open the books. Oh, here's the box of books. What can I see? What have I not known that's coming? And I'd always love to find a new author and get involved. And luckily I've been able to do that.
Well, I'm glad you got me involved.
And I so appreciate John's dialogue about books.
Oh, well, thank you. I'd like to thank Jennifer and Tom for joining us today for another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore. And for those of you listening in, Tom's new book is The Case of the 61 Chevy Impala. Feel free to pick one up at the Poison Pen or your local independent bookstore. Thank you, Jennifer and Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.